This lesson is about how to make chord melodies, playing chords and melody together at the same time on the guitar. We're going to simplify a very deep and challenging subject here, and I'm going to give you the 3-step process that it takes to start making your own chord melodies on the guitar. I'm Jared from soundguitarlessons.com. I'm here to help you get full creative control over the guitar so you can sound great and know what you're doing at the same time. This is just an introductory lesson into chord melodies, but it's everything you need to get started. So let's go ahead and define chord melodies first. Chord melody is mostly a guitar term, and it means that we're playing the melody and the chords at the same time, but kind of in a specific way, where often the chords are kind of following along and playing in parallel to the melody. This is slightly different than arranging for solo guitar, but it's a great stepping stone for getting there. In solo guitar, we are arranging the melody and the harmony and the bass parts and playing them all together at once. With chord melodies, we are leaving the bass part out. We are just harmonizing the melody with that inner harmony part with whatever notes fit within the chord. And again, we are often following the melody along with sometimes different chord shapes every time there's a different melody note. And you'll see what I mean as we work through this. So even though chord melodies aren't quite the same as a solo guitar arrangement, they still sound fantastic just all by themselves, and they can easily be used and or adapted to become solo guitar arrangements. Chord melodies are often thought of as just a jazz guitar thing, but they don't have to be. So I'm going to show you one example where we're going to create a chord melody from just a classic tune that everybody knows, and then we're going to also create a chord melody with the same 3 steps from a classic and standard jazz tune. We're just going to scratch the surface here, but chord melodies and arranging for the guitar are both topics that I will be returning to regularly on this channel, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss those lessons. This topic can be so daunting, so what are the 3 steps that we need to make our own chord melodies? Well, step 1 is just that we need to know the melody and the chords. Pretty straightforward. That's what we think of as just knowing a song. We need to know the melody and we need to know the chords. That's step 1. Step 2 is that we need to map out the melody somewhere along the upper strings of the guitar. So along a single string, the top string, or the second string, or the top 3 strings. So we have room to fill in the harmony underneath. Part of this step is when we maybe want to change the key and figure out what key the whole range of the melody fits nicely in by going along some of the top strings. I often recommend finding the entire melody, if you can, along one string, and then working out chord shapes under that, which we're going to do here in a second, and then switching string sets later for finding the easiest way to play it. And step 3 is the actual hard part. The real work here is we want to find the closest chord voicing that we can to every single instance of the melody, every single note of the melody. We want to find what is our closest chord voicing that we can find that is the appropriate chord that needs to be used during that part of the song. These chord shapes that we find will often be inversions, which means that the root is not the lowest note. We just want to find whatever we can to fill in the notes of the chord. And like I said, we want to fill in those notes below the melody. Depending on where you're at with knowing your theory, having the kind of your scales mapped out, arpeggios, chord tones, stuff like that, having the fretboard knowledge, depending on where you're at with that, this phase of finding the right chords can be a considerable amount of work. If you know some of that stuff, it makes it go much, much faster. The chord theory series that this lesson is a part of, that I've been doing for a while, has tons of great information and tons of lessons that will help fill in that information for you, fill in that knowledge for you. If you need to fill in some of those gaps, please check out the link in the description to the full playlist of the series. So those are the 3 steps. We just need to know the chords and the melody first. Then we need to map out the melody on a single string, the first string, second string, ideally, and then save the 3rd string for if you need to go there for the range of the melody. And then that 3rd step is we need to find the closest chord shape, chord voicing that we can for every melody note, moving along with the melody along that string. There are a few other details that we will get to as we go through the process, but now let's go ahead and put it to the test and show you some examples. The first chord melody that we are going to make is with the tune of Happy Birthday. So we do need to know the melody and the chords and just know what they are first, so you can see those on the screen here. We have the sheet music up, you have the chord progression and the melody written out. Step 2 is finding the melody somewhere along one of the top strings. So I have, if you see the tab there already, I have the melody mapped out along the second string of the guitar. So that's going to be like this. And step 3, the actual hard work here. Let's see if we can support every single one of those melody notes with a chord shape of the appropriate chord. So what I'm going to do here is, because we're harmonizing with mostly triads, and we have a couple seventh chords there, but I'm going to harmonize this with just 3 notes total, and I'm going to have the supporting notes always be on strings 3 and 4. The melody note is going to be on string 2, and the supporting notes of the harmony are going to be on strings 3 and 4. So this means that our chord melody, the actual chord shapes, sometimes when you include the melody, won't always be a complete chord. So that melody note is either going to be a chord tone filling in the chord, or it's going to be a note that is replacing a chord tone because it's surrounding the chord in some kind of way. This is the way I prefer to do it. I think it's a cleaner sound, makes it easier to play. I don't like doubling notes and having kind of more notes underneath. So you'll see what I mean as we map it out here. So these 2 pickup notes, we're not going to harmonize at all, just because they are pickup notes, and so we're just going to start when the actual chord progression comes in. So this first chord here is supposed to be G, so I'm thinking of this chord shape, 1, 3, 5, and the melody note is replacing the 5. So that's what I'm talking about with how it's not a complete chord sometimes, but we get this sound. Okay, so it fills in the chord where it needs to. Usually if melody notes are around chord tones, they are going to resolve or use those chord tones at some point. So it's going to sound really appropriate, like a full sound. So we have, good, now the melody goes up to here and the chord is still G. So I need to find a chord shape that is a G chord on these 2 strings with this note. Happens to be this chord shape here. So what you'll find, and there are many ways to work on this, but what you'll find is that if you know your inversion shapes along the strings that you're working on, that makes things significantly easier. I can see that that's a G shape, this is a G shape, this is a G shape. We're going to end up using all of those triad shapes. So right now we have, good, and now the chord is going to change to D, and the melody is going to go here, and I can see that there's a D chord shape here. Now, of course, when you do this, you might need to or want to take a lot of time to really think through it. I'm going to go through pretty quickly just to say, I see the chord shape here, and we're mapping it out there. Okay, so there's the D chord shape that we have there. Now we're still on D, and that melodic statement happens again. So now I have to make a D shape over here. Okay, for that same statement, and this is a D chord shape where kind of that's the root if you think of it as a C form in the cage system, but I'm playing just the top 3 notes of that. Cool, and then I need to go, okay, here's a D shape here, and then I resolve down to this note, and I need to find a G shape. So you can see how knowing those shapes along the strings is going to make it all the difference in the world. Now I have that note again with a G, and then it's going to go up here to a G7 chord. Okay, so there's a G triad, that same shape that we did before, but I'm going to make it a dominant 7th chord by including the closest flat 7 that I can find. Okay, and then the melody is, okay, so what's my G shape off of this? And then how do I add the closest flat 7 I can find? That's the sound I want. Okay, what's the G shape here? And then I want to add a flat 7. So it's that sound. So we're going to get, okay, and now sounds unresolved there because that's our G7 chord. So now it's going to a C chord with this as the note, as the melody note, and going down. So we're actually going to be finding this C chord shape and have this dissonant kind of resolution for a sec. Dissonance to the resolution. Okay, so it's all coming together. I'll play it for you all at once in a second here. And then we have the C chord up here. We're using a lot of these same shapes, this same triad shape we used on both D and G, we're now using on C. we resolve to G for that melody note, and then